Welcome back, students. After learning the vagus nerve, this is time to learn the accessory nerve, the 11th cranial nerve. Now, the question is, describe the accessory nerve under following heads. Origin of the nerve, its intracranial course, then its extracranial course, its branches, functional components, and lastly the applied anatomy. Okay, so you may begin writing the answer of this question with these following lines. Okay, the accessory or the 11th cranial nerve is a pure motor nerve. That means it supplies only to the skeletal muscle, okay, of the spatial visceral origin, okay, from branchial arches. It has two roots. It has two roots. One is the cranial and another is the spinal root. Spinal root, of course, it's applied to the muscle skeletal, which is known as the sternomastoid or sternocleidomastoid and trapezius, but the cranial root along with the course of the vagus will supply to the pharynx, larynx, soft palate, trachea, okay, and other structures, okay, but they are all motor. So the whole of this 11th cranial nerve is motor in origin, okay, it has the motor innervation only. The cranial root supply the muscles of larynx, pharynx, okay, while as I said, the spinal root supplies the sternomastoid and that of the trapezius muscle. Okay, with this introduction, let us come to the attachment of this nerve to the brain, that is on the surface of the brain, that is medulla, and then we will learn its intracranial course till it comes out through the jugular foramina. Okay, that is the intracranial course. The cranial root arises from the medulla. It arises from the medulla between the olive and the inferior cerebellar peduncle. Okay, this is between the olive and the inferior, where we have learned that the 9th and 10th, that is the glossopharyngeal and vagus nerves, were also taking origin from the same groove, that is the same groove. Now, this origin is below that of the vagus, because vagus is 10th and this is the inferior, this is the 11th cranial nerve. Okay, so it will lie inferior to the origin of the vagus nerve from this groove, that is the posterolateral groove, okay, onto the medulla, okay, onto the medulla. Now this, let us see this origin in this diagram. Okay, I have just shown you here the diagram. You can see this diagram. This is that cranial root. Okay, this is the cranial root of the accessory nerve, which is taking origin from the posterolateral sulcus, which lies between the olive and this is the inferior cerebellar peduncle. So from the lowest part, this nerve is taking origin with around few rootlets. Okay, these rootlets, okay, they take origin with the rootlet, which soon form the trunk, okay, of the cranial root of the 11th cranial nerve. Okay, now this will then go towards the jugular foramina. So this is that intracranial course, okay, intracranial course. But the spinal root, it arises through the it comes, okay, and ascend through the foramina magnum, okay, and runs towards the jugular foramina. This is the spinal root, okay, this is the spinal root. Now this spinal root will arise by the various various roots, which is taking origin from the lateral aspect of the spinal cord, C1, C2, C3, C4 and C5. So this spinal root arises from the side of the spinal cord here, as you are seeing in this diagram. Okay, from the all upper cervical segment, you can call it from C1 to C5, okay, C1 to C5. Now this spinal root, which is taking origin by these 5 rootlets here, okay, then it ascends and it passes through the foramina magnum and it forms a single trunk, and that is the spinal root of the accessory or the 11th cranial nerve, okay. Once it has gone through the foramina magnum, then it ascends upwards and laterally to go to the jugular foramina. I drew these 2 bones which indicate the jugular foramina. So this is going towards the jugular foramina. Just before they enter, okay, both cranial as well as spinal roots, before they enter to the jugular foramina here, they unite with each other for some distance, okay. Just before entering, both the spinal and cranial root, they come close to each other, they unite with each other, and as soon as they come out of the jugular foramina, now these roots once again they separate. This is the cranial root and this is that spinal root. They separate out. This indicates that there is no mixture of the fibers. It doesn't happen like that. The fibers of a spinal root will go into the cranial root and cranial root fiber will come into the spine. They remain separate. Just they come close to each other. Now, this separation takes place just at the lower border of the jugular foramina and sometime within the jugular foramina, where there is the presence of the vagus nerve with its superior ganglia. So this is the vagus nerve, okay, and this is superior ganglion and this is the inferior ganglion of the vagus nerve, okay. So the cranial root which was here, this cranial root will separate out from this union and then this will finally fuse with that of the vagus nerve. It will fuse with the vagus. So what is the fate of the cranial root? One which has taken origin from the posterolateral sulcus between the olive and the inferior cerebellar peduncle will for some distance will fuse with that of the spinal root, but ultimately it will come out and will fuse with the vagus nerve. So the fibers of the cranial root, now they become the part of the vagus nerve and it will be distributed along the distribution of the vagus nerve. So this is the problem, that we do not know the vagus nerve fibers, whether they are coming from the vagus nerve proper or they are coming from the cranial root of the 11th or accessory nerve. Okay, so there is no mean by which we can find out which muscle is supplied by the cranial root and which muscle is supplied by the vagus nerve proper, because the fibers they actually mix here. Okay, they mix and then they are distributed and then they are. So this vagus nerve then along with the fibers of the cranial root will be distributed to the various structure, that means to the muscle, as it is motor nerve only, muscle of the pharynx. Okay, there are various pharyngeal muscle, constrictor muscle, stylopharyngeus, palatopharyngeus, like that, and this nerve will also supply to the muscles of the larynx. Okay, they will supply at the extensor muscle, external muscle, that is cricothyroid, or internal muscle, that is called as intrinsic muscle. They are all supplied by the vagus nerve. Okay, vagus nerve. So this is how the distribution of the fibers will take place along the vagus nerve, which we have already learned in the previous video, where we have seen the distribution and branches of the vagus nerve going to the various places. So we will not deal this now further. Cranial root of the 11th or accessory nerve. Now let us come to the extracranial course. Now this spinal root will separate out. The spinal root, after separating from the cranial root, see this. This is the cranial root, and this will separate out here, and thus this spinal root, after separating from cranial root at the lower margin of the jugular foramina, will descend between the internal jugular vein and internal carotid artery. See here in this diagram, which is a cross-sectional diagram, this is the anterior aspect, this is the lateral aspect, this is the posterior aspect, and this is the medial aspect of this diagram. This is the internal carotid artery and the internal jugular vein. So this nerve will run first between these two, internal jugular and the internal carotid artery. After crossing the transverse process, okay, you are seeing this transverse process of the atlas. This is the foramina transversorium of the atlas. This is the tip of the transverse process. So after lying in front or crossing the anterior surface of this transverse process of the atlas vertebra, okay, the nerve will lie deep to the styloid process. See here, this will lie deep to the styloid process here, okay, between the styloid process, it will lie deep to the styloid process and posterior belly of the digastric muscle. This is the posterior belly of the digastric. So it will lie between the deep to the styloid process and the posterior belly of the digastric muscle. Right, then the nerve enters the substance of the sternocleidomastoid muscle. Okay, then this nerve is entering into the substance of the sternocleidomastoid muscle and will emerge from its posterior border, and then the further course will lie within the posterior triangle. We have seen that accessory, spinal accessory now comes out from the posterior border of the sternocleidomastoid and then runs downwards and backward to disappear deep to the anterior margin of the trapezius, but that course is in the posterior triangle. So this is the how the nerve that is called as the spinal accessory part of the nerve will be distributed, okay, or it is course, intracranial course, okay, it's intracranial course. Let us come to the branches of this nerve. The branches are few because the cranial part will be distributed along with the vagus nerve. So the cranial root of this nerve, that is, it will be distributed through the vagus nerve, okay, and it will innervate the muscles of the soft palate, it will larynx, the muscles of the pharynx, okay. It also supplies all the muscles of palate. That means in soft palate it will supply all the muscles of the palate except the tensor tympani, okay, except tensor, not tympani, tensor palati, okay, except the tensor palati. This will supply all the muscle there, okay, in the palate. All the muscles of the pharynx it will be supplied except one muscle, that is the stylopharyngeus. It will be except the stylopharyngeus, which is supplied by the glossopharyngeal nerve. All other muscles of the pharynx, okay, as well as the intrinsic muscles of the larynx will be supplied by the vagus nerve. You can call it as through the cranial root it may be supplying to this muscle, because as I said, we are not sure exactly the which muscle of the larynx, pharynx, soft palate, okay, an intrinsic muscle or extrinsic muscle of pharynx, which muscle is properly supplied by the cranial root of accessory or by the vagus nerve, or by this, because the mixture takes place, and we may say that this is distributed along with the vagus nerve, Then the recurrent laryngeal nerve is also the branch of the vagus which will come and supply to the intrinsic muscle of the larynx. And that is also through the vagus nerve. So we do not know much about the exact distribution of the cranial root, okay, but we definitely know that the spinal root, which has taken origin from C1 to C5 on the lateral aspect of the spinal cord, and then the trunk has ascended through the foramina magnum and then to the jugular foramina, and then it united for some short distance with the cranial part and will separate out, and ultimately it will go to that supply to that of the sternocleidomastoid and trapezius. We have seen this course, okay. This will go and supply the sternocleidomastoid, and next muscle will supply to be supplied will be that of the trapezius. I will just draw so that you will remember it, that how these two muscles are supplied. So this is the posterior border of the sternocleidomastoid. The nerve travel like that, and here I will draw the anterior border of the trapezius, under which it will disappear. Okay, the nerve, this accessory nerve will disappear. So this is trapezius. That means from here to here it is the posterior triangle. So this now will supply on the under surface of the trapezius, okay, and will end there, and it will be ending there. So this is how this now, that is the spinal branch, will be supplying. Okay, this spinal nerve will be supplying. Okay, let us come to the functional component of this now. And you know by this time what are functional component. There are motor component in now, that means there are fibers which are motor in nature. Then there are fibers which are the sensory in nature. Okay, so a nerve is usually a mix, but here I said that the accessory nerve or the 11th cranial nerve is not a mixed nerve. It is a pure motor nerve. That means all its fibers, whether it is from cranial root or the spinal root, they are going to supply the muscles. Okay, they are supplying the muscles. Now the cranial root. Let us see the origin of the cranial root first. Which cranial root takes its origin from the spatial visceral efferent. Efferent means motor, and spatial visceral means, okay, this is a nucleus represented by the nucleus ambiguous, and nucleus ambiguous is a nucleus which innervate all the skeletal muscles which are derived from pharyngeal arches. That means these are the muscles which are present into the neck region, okay, head and neck region you may call it. Okay, so these are the skeletal muscle, voluntary muscle, which are supplied by the nucleus ambiguous, which is a spatial visceral. Why it is called spatial visceral? Though because we consider this larynx, pharynx as viscera, okay, but then these visceras are supplied by these muscles are skeletal muscles, and this is supplied by a spatial nucleus which is designed for the muscles originating from pharyngeal arches. Okay, you must have read in the development of the head and neck. Okay, now this muscle, as I said, will be supplying the fibers to the muscles of larynx, pharynx, soft palate, okay, like that. So this is a single nucleus for the cranial root, spatial visceral efferent. Then for the spinal root, since it is coming from the spinal cord, so there is no spatial visceral efferent nuclei are present there. There is the presence of the general somatic efferent, okay, general somatic efferent nucleus. And this general somatic efferent is nothing but the similar to the nucleus of the anterior horn, motor horn. Motor neurons of the anterior gray matter of the spinal cord. And this nucleus, okay, they are somatic motor, and thus it is coming from the spinal nucleus of accessory nerve. This is a separate nucleus for this, okay, but they are similar to the general somatic efferent or the anterior motor nucleus. This nucleus, the spinal nucleus of accessory nerve, will send then these fibers through this root, and this will supply to trapezius and sternocleidomastoid. Though I have said to you that this nerve is purely a motor nerve, but then the muscle, that is sternocleidomastoid and trapezius, which are prominent bulky muscles, they have to send their sensory component also to the spinal cord. And this sensory component is traveling separately, not through the spinal root. Okay, otherwise in a nerve there were the mixed fibers which were sensory as well as motor, but here the sensation, proprioceptive sensation from trapezius and sternocleidomastoid, they travel into the ventral root of the cervical, second and third rami. Okay, the ventral ramus of the spinal segment C2 and C3. So it is sensory. However, you should note that these fibers which are carrying the proprioceptive sensation from muscle, tendon, okay, they are not going along with the spinal root. They are traveling separately and carrying this sensation. Okay, I hope you have understood this, the 11th cranial nerve, the accessory nerve. Let's come to the applied anatomy of this. In applied anatomy, if the nerve is cut on one side, that is the accessory nerve, okay, it may get damaged, okay. Then this sternomastoid or sternocleidomastoid and trapezius muscles are paralyzed, okay, because they supply to these two muscles on one side of the neck, okay. And this, because of the injury of the spinal nerve anywhere in this cord before it supplied to that of the trapezius and to the sternocleidomastoid. And because of this paralysis, what will happen then? The face will turn towards the side of injury. Okay, why it will turn towards the side of injury? Okay, if suppose my right sternocleidomastoid and trapezius are paralyzed due to the damage of the spinal root of accessory nerve, soon it comes as it comes out through the jugular foramina. Okay, then what will happen? My face, because right side nerves are damaged, my face will turn towards the right side itself. Okay, I will start looking towards the right side, and this is because it is the, sternocleidomastoid and trapezius, okay, of the opposite side. That means of the left side, they will contract. They will contract because there is no opposite muscle. So unopposed action of this sternomastoid and trapezius will turn, especially not trapezius, especially sternocleidomastoid, which is attached to the mastoid process and superior nuchal line. This will pull the opposite side, left side. So this will tilt the head, face towards the right side, okay, right side. So this will indicate that there is the paralysis of the muscle sternocleidomastoid, okay. Now, due to the paralysis of the trapezius muscle, okay, you will not be able to lift your shoulder up, okay. Try to lift your shoulder up, and this is lifted because of the pulling of the trapezius muscle, which is attached to that of the scapula and clavicle, okay, to the posterior border of the lateral third of the clavicle and to the acromion process, spine and the acromion process. So it will be lifting up, but then if it is paralyzed, you will fail to lift your shoulder, okay, on the side of the injury itself, okay, lift your. So these are the, applied importance of the spinal root, okay. Since cranial root has ultimately disappeared in the vagus nerve, so we are not talking about that now. We are only talking about the spinal root. Thank you very much for watching this video.